right, welcome back to another episode of Modern Cyber. I'm your host, Jeremy, coming to you as always, and looking forward to a conversation with somebody I've had the pleasure of knowing kind of virtually for a little while, but I've had the pleasure of hosting on the podcast before, talking to, learning from, and just really enjoying the conversation. I am joined today by the one and only Tanya Janca. Tanya, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me.
Yes, well, it is our pleasure. And for those who don't know Tanya, which I think is probably going to be like a very small subsection of our audience, Tanya is also known as SheHacksPurple, the best-selling author of Alice and Bob Learn Application Security. She's also the head of education and community at Semgrep, sharing content and training that revolves around teaching everyone to create secure software. Tanya has been coding and working in IT for over 25 years. She's won countless awards. I think she's spoken at pretty much every security event that you ever would have heard of. But she is an award-winning public speaker and active blogger. She's delivered hundreds of talks across 6 continents. I don't know why she hasn't gotten to Antarctica yet, but she values diversity, inclusion, kindness, which shines through in her countless initiative. And she's just a lovely human being to talk to. So again, thank you, Tanya, for making the time.
My pleasure. I actually had a plan to speak in Antarctica in 2020 and then COVID happened.
No way. Is that true story?
Yeah, there was this
insane.
big cruise ship going and then COVID started to break out and I just freaked out and canceled because I was worried, but no one on the ship got COVID. So I would have been safe, but I'm a scaredy cat, so...
Well, and especially at that time, I remember in some of the initial kind of COVID reports about the number of cases, you would sometimes see cruise ships identified as like separate countries when they were doing these assessments of number of cases per territory, and you'd see like the SS such and such. Yeah. So I understand the decision. I probably would have made a similar decision in your shoes, although I'm really curious what kind of cruise is like a cybersecurity cruise that has speakers coming in and talking about application security topics.
It was actually just, it was a whole bunch of speakers got together and booked it and then invited people to apply. And I applied and they're like, oh yeah, definitely you're coming. And so it was all technology and mostly software development. And so they're like, yes, we'll check the security box. We'll have Tanya. And then my friend Shira was going to come, who also speaks about cyber. And then as it got closer and closer, both her and I were like, is it worth potentially dying for? I don't think so. Yeah, but they had a great time. And they're like, we're not going to do it again because we've all been to Antarctica now. I missed my shot.
Hey, look, maybe we start a Kickstarter, you and me, and we organize round 2 of this, and we can all get that checkbox on our speaker charts for going down there. But let's dive into a couple things today. There's a couple things that, we're talking about a little bit off air before we started recording that you've mentioned and that I want to dive into. And one is around the concept of secure guardrails. And, guardrails are something that comes up as a security guidance, principle, foundational element, etc. And I'm just curious, like from your perspective, what are they? Because I've heard them mean many things to many people.
Yes. So think about a real guardrail. Think about a real guardrail on a road. So I used to be in a band and I played music. And I remember once we were leaving a concert. It was really late. And I sang to my bandmate because all of us were going in one vehicle and him in another vehicle. And I was like, don't fall asleep. And he's like, I'm not going to, blah, blah, blah. And so obviously he fell asleep, right? Yep. And he hit the guardrail. It scared the poop out of him, which is good. Yep. He woke up, he just had a scratch on his car, and he lived, right? It informed him of his error and helped him go back onto the road, the paved road where we want them to go. And so a lot of us talk about secure defaults, or sometimes people will call it a paved road. So this is the secure way. This is the way we want you to do it. Like, we want you to use this API gateway. We want you to use this form of authentication, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the way we want you to do it. We try to make it as easy as possible. But a guardrail, the idea is when you go off the paved road, it informs you, hey, buddy, you're doing something different than the rest of the company. One of these things is not like the other. What are you doing? And so it informs them, and it tries to kind of nudge them back onto the road. So then they have a choice, right? And almost all of them go back onto the paved road. They're like, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to use the with statement, oops, that's
Yep.
a boo-boo in JavaScript. I'm not supposed to do that. I'll go back and use the thing I know I'm supposed to. But sometimes they want to choose to do the thing. So the first time I hit a guardrail or a secure guardrail was at Microsoft. So I was making insecure demos on purpose.
Okay.
And so I made a connection string in my code because I wanted to demonstrate finding the secret and how this was bad. And I go to check it in with Azure DevOps, and Azure DevOps is like, no, there's a secret in your code. And I was like, yeah, I know.
I did it on
and so I was
purpose.
like, please, yeah, I was like, check it in anyway. And they're like, we need an explanation. So I put the explanation like, I'm doing this. And it's like, no, I still don't think you should. And so then I'm a dev. So you know what I did? I freaking crushed it and made it go in anyway. And then I pushed it to prod because it was a demo. It was in my own separate network that was like had firewalls around it. There was no data in that database, etc. Right? So I felt I was not causing organizational risk. But imagine the viewpoint from someone else. So my boss calls me a few minutes later. He's like, Tanya, what are you doing? Did you know Azure can make phone calls? I did not know. And so apparently Azure, there was this automated call that said a dev just did this. And I explained what we were doing, and then we had this good laugh. He's like, haha, Azure's angry with you. And we're joking. We thought it was very funny. And then I'm like, oh, I have another call coming through. I'm going to let you go.
Yeah.
And it was the Microsoft incident response team. That is not the way you want to meet those people. So these are normally very nice people, but they're not very impressed when you wake them up late at night for a pretend security incident. So I had a lot of apologizing to do. But the point is that there I am being a dev. I just put it in anyway. And so a lot of times I'll work with companies and they're like, we're so excited to be able to break the build. We're just going to stop the devs from doing bad things. But very quickly, there'll be a false positive. So I felt that was sort of a false positive because I knew what I was doing. I knew I wasn't causing organizational risk. I was making the demo on purpose to teach customers and the public about what not to do, right?
Right.
And so to me, I was like, no, I know I'm going off the paved road. I've been informed. I can sense to this. I'm aware of the risk and I'm accepting this risk, right? But so as a lot of developers I see, they'll have and it's especially stack analysis tools or even software composition analysis tools where they're like, this is a false positive. I'm going to go to prod anyway, right?
Yeah.
And then they have enough false positives, they just turn the whole thing off. So a lot of security teams are like, oh, we're going to break the build and then they're going to stop and it's going to be great. And I'm like, devs are like water. We can go around anything. Like I remember writing a decryptor so that we could just get the keys to the things and update stuff in prod because I wanted to. And customers wanted things within an hour, and making a request to the security team and doing all this stuff and then having it go to the DBAs took 24 hours, and then customers would yell at me. So we just wrote a decryptor and then we would just do it. We would break the policy so we could please the customer. And obviously that's not like a good thing. We shouldn't have done that. But it's because the security was in the way of availability, right?
Yeah.
And developers will just go around whatever you've got. And so a lot of customers or people I consult with, they're very excited at first with breaking the build. And I'm like, if you break the build all the time, everyone's just going to be ticked off at you and they're going to turn your tools off. You need to be very serious when you break the build because they can go around you. And so if whenever possible, you use a guardrail to nudge them back to where you'd like them to be. So like, let's say you have an IDE plugin with a stack analysis tool. And then you have certain rules to enforce your coding guideline to, this looks like a vulnerability, please don't do this, etc. And it does a little red squiggly when you go off the line. So that would be one type of guard rule you could do. Then another guard rule could be, okay, so I'm checking my code in. Hey, there's a secret there. That doesn't look so good. And then maybe you have a linter run and it's like, hey, you know what, your API definition file, it's not doing these 3 things that we kind of agreed we would do, buddy. And so you're trying to nudge them in the right direction. And then by the time they're actually doing the build, they're sending it to production through the release pipeline. If you're breaking something that they've previously hit the guardrail on, like they've probably decided they know they're off-roading. I've heard people call it off-roading. But whatever it is, like they're very confident that they're doing that thing. And if you've warned them 2 or 3 times along the way, if you break build, they don't care, right? Like they're like there's a reason they're doing it. So I do think we should break the build on very important things. But the rest of the time, if we could nudge them to do the right thing, I find we get better results personally. But especially earlier in the SDLC, like if it's while they have the context open, they have the code open, and it's like, hey, like don't use this function, use that function. It's like, okay, sure. Versus 6 weeks later, after they've released a prod, we have like these pen test results, and they're like, what was I working on?
Well, I think even 2 weeks later, when it's like getting ready to go into staging or UAT, you're going to get a lot more pushback, right? Because I've already built this code, and if you're telling me I need to go back and rewrite this function or change to this library or whatever, now I've got to reconsider everything that I've worked on for the last couple of weeks. But you raise a point there that I want to dig into, because I'm really curious what your experience has been around this kind of, let's say, organizational friction, more the organizational friction than the technical control. Because I think the technical control is pretty easy, and it's even easy, conceptually easy, right? It's easy to just have the idea that like, hey, rule violations of type X will fail the build, or, you know, these are the rules that are in that group of things that are like the, you know, the 10 commandments carved in stone that thou shalt not violate them or build will fail, whatever. But there's a couple questions that come to my mind. First one is, how do you figure out that threshold for what qualifies as fail build, do not pass go? And second is, how do you differentiate the signal that is coming out of the systems so that I, as a developer, know, oh no, this is a nudge control, this is a fail control. And then like kind of follow up to that is, how do you make it so that I am not going to tune out the fail controls over time in the same way that, to your point, all these false positives would cause alert fatigue, and I'm just going to switch off mentally from paying attention to any of it?
Okay, so you have so many questions. Okay, so the first question, how do you decide what you fail on versus what you nudge on? So I would say I would nudge on everything. Like if it's a soft, it's like a notification, it's like there's the red squiggly underneath, and I'm going to look at all the errors. I'm going to look at all the compile errors. I'm going to look at all the red squigglies in my VS Code, whatever, and I'm going to check them all out. And for breaking the build, I would have it generally just be either critical or high reports, right? Okay. And where the confidence is high as well. The confidence needs to be medium or above. So if the confidence is low, no, I'm not breaking the build. If it's a medium thing, no, unless you're there. Unless you already have fixed all the highs and criticals and you're working on breaking down the mediums, I wouldn't break on it. So
and these are highs and criticals like as defined by a vendor, or highs and criticals as defined by like the tool that you're using, or, you know, what defines that?
That is the best question ever. So one of the problems with all these automated tools, and I know I work for one of them, so...
And I build one too, so yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, is that some of them don't have very much context. So the more context you can put together, the better. So what I've seen, so at one company, what I did is I took the results of all the different scanners, and the scanners I had there weren't super accurate. They were pretty old. And there are more modern tools now that exist, but I didn't have an option. So I had a first gen SAST. I had a dynamic scanner with very little customization. And so I would have it all go into Defect Dojo, which is a free tool from OWASP. And then I had a policy set, and it would know this app is public facing or not. It would know it contains sensitive information or not. And so it would have a different, more strict policy if there was higher risk associated with the app. And then it would take all these results and it would basically tell me like pass or fail. And I'd have the CI check that. And it's like thumbs up or thumbs down. That took a long time to set up, to be quite frank. But then my check in the CI was like a couple minutes instead of like the SAST was just so slow. And the DAST, it just kept crashing. So we didn't put it in there. And so that's one thing you could do to get some context. Other context could be having a different policy for each app based on, like I said, the risk. So public facing, sensitive data, is it mission critical, etc. Is legislation applied to this, or compliance like PCI, etc. Right? So then you know to be more strict or less strict. But on top of that, tuning your tools as best you possibly can to make sure you're getting more accurate results. So for instance, I see it like a lot of companies that sell DAST, and they're like, we're great with APIs. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're great with web apps. You're like, you find lots of stuff in web apps, and I totally still use one all the time for that. But unless you have like a pen tester sitting there, and doing like a web proxy and manual testing, I find that they're not great. I'd rather use like an API specific dynamic scanner, an API specific fuzzer or whatever. And so adjusting your tool set so it's as accurate as humanly possible. And then I only in the CI test for the super serious things I really care about. So like definitely injection, cross-site scripting, like OWASP top 10-esque types of vulnerabilities. I know with the new top 10, we can't test for design flaws automatically, but all the ones that like really scare me. How about that? And then you do rely on the tool, right? And so as soon as a false positive comes through, you need to figure out how to suppress that. And only suppress it if it's a false positive. So I got banned last week on Stack Overflow, like permanently, because I tried to answer all the Semgrep questions in one day, and they did not like that. And one of the questions was, how do I suppress this result in Semgrep? But then I looked at it, I'm like, no, that's actually XSS. You need to fix that. Don't suppress it. Here's how you fix it. And they're like, you didn't answer his question.
Oh my gosh.
Four downvotes in like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll not see you on Stack Overflow.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I mean, what's really funny and kind of like crazy timing around the day we're recording this episode also was a headline of how Stack Overflow is the latest place where quote unquote helpful Stack Overflow answerers are actually have been found to be people attempting to plant malware in various applications. So there are people on there who are answering questions like, oh, hey, Tanya, you have a problem with this. Oh, you should grab the latest version such and such of this package. Let me point you to it. And that is a package that has embedded malware. I tend to think that site's been in decline for a little while, unfortunately. And I know our own dev team doesn't use it nearly as much as any dev team did like 3-4 years ago. But yeah. Anyway, okay, so that's one aspect of it. But then, like, again, if I'm the dev, how do you suggest that security teams engage with them to help them understand, like, hey, we've got this thing in place. Sometimes it's going to tell you this, and that is just a nudge, and here's how we as the security team would like you to deal with it. Never mind, by the way, all the baggage that goes into that conversation that you probably already hate us and consider us the Department of No. But then there are going to be these other things that fail. And by the way, what's in those two different buckets is different for, to your point, crown jewel applications that are regulated or financial or healthcare or whatever. That's going to be a much more, a much lower threshold towards failure of a build, etc. Because I find that is one of the biggest challenges that you have to figure out is just kind of like, what's the communication so that it is received appropriately and responded to appropriately?
Okay, excellent question. So one of the things I talk and teach about a lot is the idea of advocacy. So like connecting with software developers, building trust with them, educating them on the things you expect them to do. So I've seen a lot of security teams where they're like, this is our SaaS, that's your problem now. It's going to scan things and send you these giant reports, and we plan to not help you. And guess how that goes? Poorly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
terribly,
usually,
of course, yeah.
I try to socialize the idea that a new tool's coming. Then I have certain key developers help me choose the tool. So I gather requirements from lots of teams. So like which languages, frameworks, which CIs does it need to work with, which repos, etc. And then some, hopefully, developers that like me and are willing to work with the security team where I've built trust over time. Yeah. And I get them to help me choose it. And I remember showing a SAST tool to this group of developers, and we're playing with it. And I'm just talking about it, and one of them said, can we keep it? And then I knew I found the right one, right?
Yeah.
They're like,
yeah.
we think it's great. Like, you're going to buy it for us, right? I'm like, yeah.
Right,
Oh God,
right.
if you'll use it, I'll get whatever you want.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
this is so awesome.
Yeah.
And so then having like a workshop, showing everyone how to use it, making sure I'm available for questions. The first time I'd run a scan, then I would send it the results and I'd say, hey, do you want to meet and go through the results together and talk it out? Or are you like, go away, Tanya, I got this? And half of them are like, go away. And they would just fix things when they're ready. And the other half were like, meet with me. This is new. Walk me through. And then they would start fixing things. And we got a lot of stuff fixed in the first 3 months, like a surprising amount, with tons of communication. Like, I remember I was like, okay, guys, we're doing this. And they're like, oh my gosh, you've told us 100 times. And I was like, yes, so I have communicated enough.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure that the tool makes them feel smart and empowered, not stupid and held back, right? And so that might mean that at first you just do the high priority checks and you get those things fixed. And then over time you add more checks and more checks over time. Because if you send them a report that's 200 pages long, I don't know about you, but like, to me that feels like a slap in the face. 200 pages of bugs in my app? What, you think I'm an idiot? Right?
Yeah.
Like, so sending them a well-curated report that just shows things you're very confident about to start with, and then over time digging into more vague, you're not sure sorts of things. So I feel like, so when I was a dev, I wasn't necessarily the best communicator. And then I took a lot of management courses and communication courses because I was too direct. I would be extraordinarily direct. And I was at B-Sides Vancouver this week, and there were some people talking in the hallway right outside the door, and my friend was giving a presentation. I just like walk up, I open the door, and I'm like, come in or go talk somewhere else. We can hear you. You're done now. And I was like, oh, my dev person's coming out, but they did it, right? And later someone was like, thank you so much. Like, I was struggling to hear the speaker. And they just didn't realize we could hear them, right? Like, I wasn't like F off, but I'm like, you're done now, okay? Go. Or come in, right? And they decide not to come in, which is fine. But, like, it's like they couldn't make up their mind yet, right? But I'm like, don't stand right next to the door. So sometimes I'm a little too direct with my feels. And so I had to learn to be less, like, learn to beat around the bush, if that makes any sense. And learn to soften the message and learn to repeat the message, because some people need it to hear it multiple ways. And like, that was a big learning curve for me. But I did it, and now I'm less abrupt.
Fair enough. Yeah. What's interesting in that, by the way, is you refer to this as your dev personality. I think most people would say that's a security personality. And you know, classically, that is, you know, how a lot of people perceive security teams, especially kind of network and infrastructure security. You know, in many of the organizations I've worked with have that reputation of, you're going to get dry as bone, crystal clear. It is, you know, binary 0 or 1 fact type of communication at best, and delivered with like no padding or any kind of fluff or niceness around it. Yeah. But
I feel like you can't do your job with AppSec if you're like that. And I feel like you're just not going to get anywhere. And maybe it's because I'm female, I'm not sure. But like, when I was a pen tester, I couldn't go up and be like, your app sucks, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's not going to go well. So I'd be like, hey, I found something. Can we talk about it? And I remember some of the pen testers being like, she takes too long. She's wasting all this time. Like, I saw her sitting and coding, and I was like, yeah, because I kept telling him, you know, do an approved list, not a block list. Yeah. And he just kept doing block lists. So I was like, hey, can I drive? And he's like, okay. And then I just reversed the regex basically, right? And he's like, right? And so it turned out I just was a sucky pen tester and a much better AppSec person. And that's okay, because I just kept doing AppSec. I'm like, let's threat model this. And they're like, there's no time for that, Tanya.
Yeah. Gotta ship, must ship. I
ship.
turned out to be a sucky developer, and that's how I ended up in security, because I couldn't write good enough code. But there was another thing in what you said that I want to dig into, which is that, like, when I think a lot of companies, and it's really easy for me as somebody who is building a software company to fall into this trap as well. You got to remember that like the customer that you're working with, it's yes, you want them to adopt it everywhere. And like, you say, hey, you're using in our case, API security tool. Awesome. Like apply it everywhere. But that may not actually be the best experience for that organization. And there actually is like a kind of a phase-in process that is really important. And if you don't get it right with let's say with the initial implementation and the first kind of workloads that you're onboarded with, and then you try to make it bigger, you've just made a bad situation much larger and worse. Yeah, way worse, right? And so guess what? When it comes time for renewal and you look at the customer satisfaction scores, they're not going to be that good. And so, what you mentioned about kind of rolling a new practice out by, I think you said, just start with your highs and your criticals, and then over time you can improve and improve and improve. I think that is such a key point to bear in mind. And there was one other thing that I think you dug into that probably often goes kind of assumed but not actually implemented in practice, which is, to the extent that security teams actually involve some of their secondary stakeholders in decision making, I think you're going to get much better outcomes, right? Because to your point, if you're the security team and you buy a security tool and the first thing that it does is just like puts all your developers on blast for how crappy their stuff is, your 200-page report, no developer is going to want to engage with that thing at all. So involving them in a decision-making process, if you've got those types of relationships and you've got the opportunity to do that, can only lead to better outcomes.
What's funny is like when Semgrep does the sales process, we always like want to include devs, and the security team's usually super resistant. And that's where we think we win, which is why we want them, right? But they're like, oh no, we don't need them, and it's like, but they're the actual user, right? Like you look at the dashboard and hopefully see the numbers go down, but they're the ones that have to like live and breathe it all day, every day. And so we're like, we really think like they should see it, and almost none of them involve them. So if you're doing one with us, like we'd love to talk to the devs. But I just did it because I have been the person that had someone else shove the security thing down my throat that I did not like the tool. And actually one of the places I went to work, there had been an AppSec guy there for a long time, and he was super brilliant but very taken for granted. And he proudly told me in our first one-on-one meeting how he had a SaaS that is not the place I work, so I'm not going to name them because I don't want to ever say bad things publicly about other competitors. He had it run on every single build, and it broke if there were mediums or highs, and all his devs were doing so great. And I was like, this is awesome, show me. And so we look at the first one, and he's like, see it run? And he's like, oh, it's disabled. And I was like, oh, weird. Well, let's just look at another one. And then we ended up spending the hour realizing that so he had spent 2 years manually adding it to every CI, having a million meetings, and all of them had been turned off. So either it didn't run at all, or it ran but only an alerting, and he was blocking nothing. And almost all of it was just completely turned off. And then we went and looked and realized only 9% of the developers had ever even logged in to see their bugs. Because you had to RDP into a server, and then you had to do this and that, and then you had an account, etc.
That's a terrible user experience.
Yeah, and he, I swear, so he ended up in the next couple months resigning of a broken heart. He was just like, he's like, I'm a fool. I'm too ashamed to show my face at work. I'm like, no, you're awesome. It's not you. And he left. I was so sad because I thought he was really, really smart, very passionate person. But he's like, my feelings are too hurt. I don't want to work at a place where the devs don't respect me. And so he left. I yanked that tool out. I put something else in with more true positives, fewer false positives, a dashboard where they didn't have to hop onto 5 different boxes to get to it, etc. And then we started getting some results. But I just, I felt so bad for him.
Look, I mean, I think 2 lessons learned out of that story. One is you have to meet people where they work on a day-to-day basis. Every security vendor us included, to some extent, we're guilty of this as well. We love our dashboard. We love our UI. We put a lot of time and effort into making something pretty. But the truth of the matter is, like most security teams, what they want to do is log in at the beginning, go through implementation cycles, maybe some tuning, get it to where they want it to be exactly, and then wash their hands of it, walk away, and it's going to create a ticket for me. It's going to send me a Slack alert. It's going to pop up in my IDE. I don't know. It's going to do the red squiggly underline. Whatever it is that it's going to do, it should do that thing in a place that you're already going to be every day as you are doing your work, and meet you where that is. The second thing that I wanted to highlight from that story is, there will be probably a temptation from some of our audience to listen to this and say like, well, that person was too sensitive. That person was too, took it too personally or whatever. It's just a job. And, it's not them. It's the organization. It's the organization's fault, etc. But remember that your security programs are run by people at the end of the day. And their job satisfaction directly influences your security outcomes. And so when you've got kind of broken organizational processes, whether it's communication, whether it's, I don't know, this case, there was a whole lot going on, I would say, but whatever those things are, remember that kind of the health, mental health and well-being of the people running your security program, like I said, that has a direct correlation on your security outcomes.
Oh yeah. Having 2 years of your work deleted behind your back.
Yeah.
As the media, as us looking continued, I just started getting kind of uncomfortable because he wasn't angry. He was hurt. He'd worked there 12 years. He felt these people were his peers. It was betrayal. I felt upset, and I had only worked there 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And then he seemed so embarrassed in front of me, and it was I still have complete respect for you. This is, so it's so true. I actually talk a lot about incident response and how, if you just crush your teams with incidents all the time and they never have recovery, guess what? They quit and they work somewhere else where people treat them well. And it's way cheaper to just not treat them like crap and keep your team rather than burning them out and then having to find new ones all the time.
Yeah, that whole question of, and I've seen this a lot, especially at larger organizations where they need to maintain a certain amount of staffing, right? Where they've got, tens of people or hundreds of people working SOCs and IR and so on, as opposed to one or two where you can treat them individually. They'll often look at a decision like, oh, well, I can't give Jeremy a raise as a, level 1 incident response SOC analyst because that's going to disrupt the, I don't know, the level or the band, the salary band for that position. Well, I will tell you, hiring and retraining is way more expensive than retention, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I got hired once to mentor someone 2 to 4 hours per week for a year so that he could turn into an AppSec professional. And they were paying him something like $70K a year. And so then at the end, they give him a $10,000 raise. And he's like, cool, I'm off to Mandiant for a 250% raise. Bye. And I was just
my gosh.
So it's you really got to look at the pay scales and what's going on in the world and talk with them.
What's the reality? Yeah.
That was scary.
We're coming close to time here. We've got a few minutes left. I've still got a couple of questions. I have one question I kind of want to spring on you out of the blue, and I'll be very curious to hear your reaction to this. And I apologize in advance for not prepping you with this one. I recently had a conversation with the CEO of a really fast-growing company in the security space who shall remain unnamed. All right, and his position to me when we were chatting about what I'm working on the API security space side. And by the way, I really appreciated all your comments earlier. For those for whom those comments resonated, please do check out Firetail. I think all the things you said we have experienced and thought about in the design of our own product. So hopefully that comes through for you if you ever have a look at it. But when I talked about API security, the CEO was super dismissive and said to me, made a comment on the order of, look, APIs are part of an application, and AppSec just really isn't that important in the broad scheme of the cybersecurity landscape. And I dug into the comment with him, and I was like, you're crazy, because actually applications protect the data, and the data is ultimately the crown jewel. So and he brought up this counterpoint, and his view was like, yeah, but if you look at where all the money goes, which is to say the spending in cybersecurity, there is way more money spent on network security and on things like infrastructure security. Like probably I think he said something like $20 to $1 spent on NetSec and InfoSec as opposed to AppSec. So first of all, like, how do you refute that in like, you know, because you've been doing AppSec and kind of, you know, very well known and specialized in AppSec for a while. I happen to think he's wrong, and like the strategic importance is on the AppSec side. But I'm curious if you've gotten comments like that in the past before, and how do you explain to people the importance of AppSec?
So I do agree with one part of what he said. Yes, organizations have traditionally spent significantly more on network security and infrastructure security. Yes, that's part of why AppSec is such a giant dumpster fire, because we haven't been giving proper attention to it. And if you look at the Verizon breach report, which I have looked at for many years, the number one cause of data breach is insecure software every year for many, many years. And so as a result, and data breaches are the most damaging, humiliating, and expensive types of security incidents. So while phishing might be the number one cause of security incidents in general, they're often significantly less expensive, or they're part of a much bigger attack that actually is because of insecure software that the data breach occurs. And so that's part of why it's extremely important. The other part is so the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of these data and systems are our responsibility to protect. And so if they're not available because there's a cyber attack, or because someone has been beating up those APIs with brute force attacks and there's no gateway protecting them, or they didn't turn on the rate limiting or whatever, right? You can't get your work done and your job done, right? And so I would say in having them be available, having the confidentiality of your data still protected, making sure the data you receive is actually accurate is quite important as well. I remember doing a threat model. So Life Labs, I don't know if you've heard of them, but they do basically all of the blood tests across Canada, or a lot of them. And they had a data breach. And I remember someone saying, well, I'm not sick, so why do I care? Because I had a friend who had, she had a brain tumor, but for 18 years. And so, but it would show up on test results, right? And I'm like, well, we need to protect people like her, like the minority. And he's like, well, I don't have that problem, so why do I care? I'm like, you dummy. I could just go onto Pastebin, copy it, add that you are HIV positive, and then upload it somewhere else. And then boom, everyone in the world thinks you're HIV positive from now on. And he's like, oh. And I'm like, and people are biased against people that are HIV positive. Like, you might not get a job, or you might not whatever, right? Like, or I could give you every single type of bad health condition that exists, like the dangerous ones, like you have heart disease and you have everything, you have all the cancers, every single one of them, right? And like, you're never going to get insurance again, right? And he was like, oh. And so when data gets leaked, it can literally result in death. The integrity of the data can result in financial harm, physical harm, health harm, etc. Like, so I think that sometimes people also forget what runs software. So like, if you have an insulin pump, imagine the integrity is broken. So it's still available, but it killed you, right? And so when people are like, oh, AppSec's not important, and I'm like, cool, try to live a single day without software. Just try it.
Yeah.
Even if you're out camping, I bet you wouldn't believe how many of your little things have software in them. Or how'd you get to the campsite? Did you use Google Maps? Right? And so when they think about just how many times per day that they use software, like actually I'm looking, I have this ring, it's an Aura ring. And there's software in there, right? And so when we think about all of that, that's part of, I don't know if I had the most concise answer for you, but I hope that it helped.
Well, look, I think this point about, software runs in everything nowadays. And I think I think it was the Mark Andreessen quote, software is eating the world. I mean, it is quite literally true, aside from maybe eating, but it is powering pretty much everything in the world. And it is such a good point. We have an advisor on our advisory board who wrote the book on IoT and device security called If It's Smart, It's Vulnerable. Just remember, like, every piece of IoT equipment, every operational technology, every industrial control system, everything is running software. And these are systems that, can't really be easily patched very often. You can't push over the air an update to a firmware or a controller or, fix some software vulnerability. Like, the importance of secure design, the importance of secure software is super, super critical. And I found it to be very dismissive in that conversation. And I wanted to get your take as somebody who specializes in AppSec. So I appreciate you taking us through your thinking around that.
I suspect that him and I could have a really good conversation.
Awesome. Well, I know there's a couple things I wanted to kind of ask you to finish up today. Number one is, I hear you've got some fun stuff planned for the summer. You've recently opened a free academy. What's that all about?
Yes, so I run the community for Semgrep. So Semgrep bought my company, SheHacksPurple, last year. And we had this giant community and giant academy, and we're just slowly rebranding it and rebuilding it so it's much bigger. And so the Semgrep Academy opened May 1st, and it's free. So you, quote unquote, pay by giving us your email address, and then we add you to our monthly newsletter, which me and the SheHacksPurple crew write. So it's actually really fun. We had thousands of subscribers to our previous newsletter, so it's actually really good. And you can just unsubscribe, but obviously you shouldn't. And so we have, so you can take courses on secure coding, functional programming, how to write rules in Semgrep, application security. I'm going to add an incident response for devs soon. We have an API security course.
Excellent.
And you get a certificate of completion whenever you finish a course. So you can show off to your friends what you've learned. And the whole thing, the plan is to just have it permanently be free. And so there's that, and that's awesome. And then I get to run community events. So I speak and participate in other community events like AppSec PNWs in 2 weeks in Vancouver. And I'm speaking at that, and the Semgrep community is helping by like running their social media for them. So this summer, we're running an AppSec trivia night in Las Vegas as part of the Hacker Summer Camp stuff. And so in between the B-Sides Las Vegas and Diana and DEF CON and Black Hat, etc., there's going to be an AppSec trivia night. And I believe we're going to partner with B-Sides Las Vegas. So it's sort of part of their conference, but run by Semgrep community. And I am looking forward to being extremely silly with the trivia. I bought a 3D printer, so I'm going to print some very silly prizes.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I really like to have a good time, if that makes sense. And sometimes I feel security is a little serious. And I used to do, music, and I did comedy and all of this. So I want it to be sort of like, this is your, like, come and eat and drink, but also prepare to be very silly. Like I helped with the B-Sides Vancouver Island one that we had in 2019, and so we're not going to do this in Vegas, so don't worry, but we had this thing where if you answered wrong, you had to eat hot sauce. I had to eat so much hot sauce that day. So whenever someone else got something wrong, we would scream hot sauce at them. And for like 2 years after on the island, if like someone said a fact wrong, we'd be like, hot sauce, and we just point at them, and then they have to eat hot sauce. But we won't hot sauce you this summer.
Fair enough. By the way, I totally agree with your point. Like, I think security is often way too serious, and like it's important to have fun and to take not only pride but take enjoyment in your work. And so I think with that, I will just say thank you again for taking so much time today. I think we went a little bit longer than we were originally planned for. I appreciate the flexibility on that side. To everybody listening, please, if you've got a moment, like, subscribe, follow, click all that good stuff. You know what I'm going to say, rate, review, and share this episode with any of your friends. The one and only Tanya Janca, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on this episode of Modern Cyber.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeremy.
Awesome. I look forward to probably losing really badly in AppSec trivia this summer at Black Hat, but I will do my best to make it out there and participate if nothing else. And please do join us next time on another episode of Modern Cyber. Bye-bye.